explaining the 7 different ways someone can interact with time travel in fiction, including numbers 4 and 6, which make for the best stories. Number 1, the immutable timeline. This is the type of time travel where the past cannot actually be changed. In an immutable universe, time is a completed tapestry. When you travel to the past, something will prevent you from making changes to history. Either you will be physically prevented from making changes, any changes you make will be reverted instantly, or your changes turn out to have always been how it happened in the first place. No matter what you do or how hard you try, history has already accounted for your decision. Every action you make was already baked into the version of history you came from. A perfect example is Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Harry and Hermione go back in time to save Sirius, but the twist is that they aren't creating a new version of events. They're completing the version of events we already saw. Harry doesn't change the past by casting the Patronus across the lake. He was always the mysterious figure who cast it. Buckbeak didn't suddenly survive because they rewrote history. He survived because they were always going to go back and save him. Another great example is Interstellar. Throughout the movie, Cooper believes he's uncovering some mysterious force that's been guiding humanity's survival from the shadows. But by the end, he discovers that he was the force all along. The ghost Murph saw in her bedroom as a child was actually her father, communicating across time from inside the Tesseract. He doesn't change history by sending her the quantum data needed to solve gravity. He fulfills history. All of the messages sent, every book knocked off the shelf, every tick of the watch's second hand, that was all already part of the past from the beginning of the movie. In an immutable timeline, it often turns time travel into tragedy. Our heroes embark on a grand and dangerous adventure across the 4th dimension, only to learn that they are not gods. They cannot change anything. The drama comes from watching them realize that. This is when the story changes. It becomes about what do they do now, with the understanding that the universe has already made its decision. That can sound limiting, but it's actually what makes this type of time travel story so powerful. By removing the possibility of changing the past, the real question becomes, can our heroes accept what happened? Can they find meaning in it even if they can't escape it? In Attack on Titan, Eren gains the ability to send his consciousness and memories into the past, to previous wielders of the Attack Titan, but it doesn't give him the power to change the past, only influence it slightly. The inevitability of time becomes a crushing weight on his mind and soul that drives the final conflict of the series as he desperately tries to save his loved ones by destroying the rest of the world. Immutable timelines give our characters a glimpse into something they should not see, then bash them on the head when they try to control it. However, if they can accept this difficult reality, it gives them new context. In the end, the past is not a place you can conquer, it is a truth you have to face. Number 2, the rewriting. Unlike the immutable timeline, the rewrite timeline is built on one simple idea. The past can be changed. History is not set in stone. Instead, it's more like a Word document. You can edit the story of the world, hit backspace, and replace entire chapters of reality, hopefully without an annoying AI assistant showing up asking you why you're trying to kill your own grandfather. In this model, there is only one timeline. When you alter the past, the original version of events disappears. The old future ceases to exist, and a new one takes its place. That means every decision has permanent consequences, because by saving one person, changing one conversation, or stepping on one particularly important butterfly, you've rewritten the lives of everyone who comes after. The definitive example is Back to the Future. Marty McFly accidentally prevents his parents from falling in love, and almost immediately, consequences begin catching up with him. His siblings start disappearing from a family photograph, and eventually, Marty himself begins to fade away. The universe is replacing the timeline Marty came from with a new one. If George McFly never becomes Marty's father, then Marty was never born to travel back in time in the first place. Of course, when you can change the past, in this entry and in all 5 of the next types of time travel, you open yourself up to the creation of paradoxes, or an impossibility that arises from tampering with reality. If you go back and push your grandpa down a flight of stairs before he can Netflix and chill with your grandma for the first time, your mom will never be born, and so you will never be born, which means you'll never exist to go back in time and cock-block your granddad. Quite the conundrum, huh? A lot of times this leads to dire consequences, like characters being erased from reality, or even the whole universe blowing up. Immutable timelines ignore this sort of problem by saying you can't cannot change the past. But rewritten timelines are different. Every trip into the past becomes a gamble. You are risking alterations to your future and the future of everyone else, no matter how disconnected they may seem from your changes. One seemingly harmless decision can completely reshape history. Maybe you prevent a war or accidentally start one. Maybe you save your best friend only to discover that you've erased your own children from existence. Another great example is Life is Strange. Max discovers she can rewind time, allowing her to undo mistakes almost as soon as they happen. Spill your drink? Rewind. Say something embarrassing? Rewind. Accidentally shoot your best friend?
It's rewind time.
But as Max continues changing larger and larger events, she realizes every alteration sends ripples through history. Relationships change, people's lives take completely different paths, and eventually reality itself begins to unravel. Every time she fixes one problem, another seems to appear somewhere else. And that illustrates the defining feature of the rewrite timeline. Causality is fragile. These stories are obsessed with the idea that the future is built on countless tiny moments, and changing even one of them can produce enormous, unpredictable consequences. The timeline simply accepts your edits, whether they're brilliant or catastrophically stupid. Because of that, rewrite stories tend to focus on responsibility and acceptance. Just because you can change history doesn't mean you should. Every decision forces the hero to play God, weighing one future against another, deciding whose lives are worth saving and whose suffering might become unavoidable. They're asking which version of history deserves to exist. The only problem is that every time you fix one thing, you might be breaking something else you never even knew was there. Number 3, the branching timeline. At first glance, this might sound almost identical to the rewrite timeline. After all, in both, the hero goes back to the past and changes history. But there's one massive difference. In a branching timeline, the original history isn't erased. Instead, it keeps going. Every time the past is changed, reality splits. A brand new timeline is born, while the original continues to exist somewhere else in an endless sea of causality. Think of history less like a line and more like the branches of a tree. Every major decision creates another path, another universe, another version of events where different choices were made. A great modern example is Avengers Endgame. After the Avengers travel into the past to collect the Infinity Stones, Bruce Banner explains that changing the past doesn't rewrite their own future. Instead, those changes create entirely new timelines. When Loki escapes with the Tesseract, he doesn't alter the events of the original Marvel Cinematic Universe. He creates another branch, one that eventually becomes the setting for the Loki series. And the TVA, the Time Variance Authority, exists to prune all of these bad timelines, the countless versions of reality separate from the primary universe we know. Dragon Ball operates on a very similar principle. Future Trunks travels back to warn Goku about the androids, but this doesn't do anything to save his own world. Instead, his actions create a second timeline where the heroes are prepared for the coming threat, while his original future remains devastated. And when Cell steals a time machine and travels back again, he creates yet another timeline branch. These characters are creating new branches in time with each jaunt into the past. In a branching timeline, every possibility is real. There isn't one correct version of history anymore. There are countless histories all existing simultaneously. Somewhere out there is a world where the hero succeeds, and somewhere else is the one where they fail. Somewhere there's probably a timeline where Batman's parents survive, and Bruce Wayne grows up to become a TikTok fitness influencer, the darkest timeline of all. This completely changes the moral questions surrounding time travel. In a rewrite timeline, changing history means choosing which future gets to exist. But in a branching timeline, you're not replacing one world with another. You're creating a new one. That sounds less destructive until you stop and think about what it actually means. Because every branch continues to exist, then every tragedy still happened. Future Trunks doesn't erase the suffering of his own timeline. Billions of people are still dead. He simply creates another universe where things turn out better. From his perspective, he isn't actually fixing history. He's giving another history the chance that his own never had. It's simultaneously hopeful and hopeless. An infinite collection of timelines means numerically nothing matters. But at the same time, maybe the uniqueness of each world means that all of them matter? This is the question at the heart of Everything Everywhere All at Once. The villain, Joy, sees total nihilism in the infinite multiverse, but our hero Evelyn finds a limitless beauty in and appreciation for her version of reality. And that's what makes the branching timeline so fascinating. It's the most optimistic and the most horrifying model at the same time. Optimistic because every bad outcome can be avoided somewhere, horrifying because every bad outcome also continues to exist somewhere else. Every choice creates winners and losers. Every decision spawns another reality where things played out differently. Number 4, the selective timeline. Up until now, the rules have been pretty straightforward. Either the past can't be changed or it can. But the selective timeline throws a wrench into all of that by saying, well, sometimes. In a selective timeline, history isn't treated equally. Some events are flexible. Others are completely concrete. You can save one person's life, but not another. You can alter a battle, but not the outcome of a war. It's as if time itself has decided which moments are essential to history and which ones are just negotiable. Doctor Who is probably the most famous example. Throughout the series, the Doctor changes history all the time. Civilizations are saved and destroyed despite what the history books may claim, and entire planets survive that otherwise wouldn't have. It usually operates like a rewritten universe, but every so often, the show introduces something called a fixed point in time. Fixed points are events that simply cannot be changed without threatening the structure of reality itself. The extinction of the dinosaurs at 65 million BC, the eruption of Pompeii, the death of the Doctor at Lake Silencio. These moments are treated like load-bearing pillars of history. Remove one, and the whole structure starts collapsing. Steins Gate explores a similar idea through what it calls attractor fields. Okabe repeatedly changes the past in an attempt to save Mayuri, but no matter what he does, history bends back toward the same outcome. The details change, the circumstances change. Sometimes it's a train that kills her, sometimes it's a gunshot, or something completely different, but the universe keeps steering events toward her death until he escapes that attractor field entirely. Despite the world line system operating much like a branching timeline, there is an additional rule binding certain distinct elements of those countless realities. Now you might be thinking, wait a second, doesn't that just sound like the immutable timeline? But it's not. In an immutable timeline, nothing can change. In a selective timeline, most things can change. The hero genuinely succeeds in altering history over and over again. It's just that certain events have been marked by the universe with a giant metaphorical sign that says "do not touch." Like the McDonald's ice cream machine. You can try all you want, but deep down, you already know how this ends. Destiny becomes selective instead of absolute. Fate is protecting specific outcomes. The universe is saying, you can do almost anything, but just not this. Because of that, these stories tend to explore a very different question than the previous categories. Instead of asking if fate exists, they assume it does, and then ask why certain moments matter so much. Why is this person's death necessary? Why is this battle unavoidable? What makes one event so fundamental that reality itself refuses to let it disappear? And while the story may or may not explore the answers to these questions, they are absolutely left in the mind of the viewer, which is what makes these stories compelling. As if there is some grand order to reality that we are peering at from a distance, and we can just barely make out its shape. Number 5, the loop timeline. Unlike every category we've covered so far, the loop timeline isn't really about changing the past at all. It's about escaping it. In a loop timeline, time doesn't continue moving forward. Instead, a certain span of time repeats over and over again. It might be a single day, a week, or even an entire human life. The characters relive the same events endlessly, usually remembering each previous attempt while everyone else resets back to the beginning, like loading a save state in a video game, blissfully unaware that they've already died 17 times before breakfast. The classic example is Groundhog Day. Phil Connors wakes up every morning to discover that it's February 2nd again. Every weather report and every conversation with the annoying insurance salesman happens exactly as it did the day before. At first, he treats the loop like a playground. He goes robbing banks, stuffing himself with food, generally behaving like someone who just discovered autosave in Skyrim. But eventually, the novelty wears off, and he's forced to confront something much more difficult than the loop itself, his own flaws. Another fantastic example is edge of tomorrow. Every time Cage dies fighting the mimics, the day resets for him. He spends these loops getting brutally killed in increasingly creative ways until he eventually becomes one of humanity's greatest soldiers by nature of the incredible amount of experience he accumulates. It's honestly a pretty effective training regimen, provided you don't mind the whole dying constantly part. And that's what makes the loop timeline unique. The other forms of time travel change history itself, but the loop changes the traveler. The world remains almost identical each cycle. The real progression happens inside the character. Every reset gives them more knowledge, more skill, or a deeper understanding of themselves, slowly transforming them into someone capable of overcoming the obstacle that trapped them here in the first place. Of course, not every loop is designed for personal growth. Outer Wilds uses its 22-minute loop as a giant cosmic mystery, encouraging the player to gradually piece together the history of an extinct civilization. ReZero turns the loop into psychological horror, forcing Subaru to repeatedly watch the people he loves suffer and die until he can finally find a path that saves them all. Same mechanic, completely different story. That's the narrative purpose of the loop timeline. Repetition creates mastery. Whether that mastery is emotional, intellectual, or physical depends on the story being told. It's a thematic tool, a literal representation of the hero's journey, which, aw shucks, would you look at that? If my eyes were working right, I'd say that sure looks like a loop to me, huh? At its core, the loop timeline is built on one simple idea. Sometimes the only way to move forward is to stop moving forward, long enough to break the cycles that have kept us trapped for so long. Number 6, the consequential timeline. Up until now, every category has focused on one question: can history be changed? The consequential timeline answers that with a confident yes, but the catch is that you're going to regret it. In a consequential timeline, changing the past is absolutely possible. Time does not stop you. It doesn't create another universe, and it doesn't insist that certain events remain fixed. Instead, it lets your changes happen and then demands payment afterwards. Every attempt to improve history comes with a new, different consequence, like a monkey's paw. Sometimes that consequence is immediate, sometimes it takes years to appear, but one way or another, time always collects its debt. DC's Flashpoint is a perfect example. Barry Allen, the Flash, goes back in time to save his mother from her killer, finally undoing the tragedy that defined his entire life. And for a brief moment, it works. His mother lives. His childhood is restored. But as Barry begins to explore this new reality, he realizes that one act of love has completely shattered the world around him. Batman is a different, far worse person. Superman never became Earth's greatest hero. Wonder Woman and Aquaman are locked in a devastating war that's tearing the planet apart. Barry got exactly what he wanted, and the universe handed him a nightmare in return. In the DCEU Flash movie, and I preemptively apologize for making you think about it, Barry saves his mom only to find that this leads to him never receiving his powers, and the world ending to a Kryptonian invasion that can only be stopped by going back and letting her die once again. Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time follows the same philosophy. The prince discovers the Dagger of Time, allowing him to rewind mistakes whenever things go wrong. Miss a jump? Rewind. Get stabbed? Rewind. Accidentally alert an entire palace full of enemies because you have the stealth skills of a toddler with a drum set?
Yeah.
But as the story unfolds, he learns that manipulating time isn't a harmless convenience. Every attempt to undo the past draws him deeper into the consequences of unleashing the sands themselves. The power to reverse mistakes does not free him from responsibility, it forces him to confront it. In these consequential timelines, every miracle has its price. These stories reject the fantasy that time travel is a perfect solution to life's problems. You can absolutely save the person you love, undo your greatest mistake, reimagine the tapestry of history. But the universe has a funny way of reminding you that actions still have consequences, even if they come in reverse order. Because of that, consequential timelines often explore themes of sacrifice. The hero is meant to question whether their change to the past is worth everything they'll have to give up in return. Sometimes the cost is another person's happiness, or even the stability of the whole world. At its core, traveling a consequential timeline is like gambling at a casino. You can be clever enough to outsmart the system, but the house always wins in the end. No exception. Number 7, the chaotic timeline. After everything we've talked about so far, you might assume every story fits neatly into one of these 6 categories. Unfortunately, comic book writers exist. The chaotic timeline is defined by a simple idea. What if we tried a whole bunch of different ideas? Here, the rules of time travel are not fixed. They change from story to story, sometimes sometimes from episode to episode or even one scene to the next. Time is not governed by a consistent philosophy. It's governed by whatever creates the most interesting story in that particular moment. Comic books are absolutely infamous for this. Take DC. Sometimes changing the past completely rewrites history with a consequence, like Flashpoint. Then the next day it creates alternate timelines. Sometimes certain events are fixed, sometimes they're not. Occasionally, Barry Allen runs so fast, he accidentally punches causality in the face, and everyone just sort of agrees to deal with the consequences later. There isn't one universal model because dozens of different writers have spent decades telling different kinds of stories. The MCU claims to operate on a branching timeline whenever using quantum time travel, but anyone who uses the Time Stone clearly rewrites time, while creating fixed points like the death of Black Widow. It's a hodgepodge of countless ideas that you're clearly not meant to think about too hard. Rick and Morty embraces this chaos intentionally. One episode treats alternate timelines as disposable. Another introduces snake time travel that's somehow even more confusing than regular time travel. Then there's an entire civilization of time police trying to enforce rules that immediately stop making sense the moment you think about them for more than 30 seconds. But this inconsistency isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's the joke. In a chaotic timeline, the mechanics serve the narrative, not the other way around. The author isn't trying to build a logically airtight system of causality. They're asking a much simpler question. What is the most entertaining thing time travel can do for us right now? If that means rewriting history this week and creating alternate timelines next week, so be it. Now, before people start typing angry comments defending their favorite franchise, this doesn't automatically make these stories worse. In fact, some of the greatest time travel stories ever told play kinda fast and loose with their own rules. After all, the audience isn't there to pass a theoretical physics exam. They're there to watch compelling characters navigate impossible situations. As long as the emotional stakes remain consistent, viewers are often surprisingly willing to forgive a little temporal nonsense. Or a lot of temporal nonsense. Looking at you, Terminator franchise. Stay frosty.